We are now recording. All right, we are starting today off with Jay Simon with American University. Jay received his PhD from UC Irvine and is currently an associate professor of information technology and analytics at American University. He's a decision analyst, and one of his research areas is how to capture preferences over geographic outcomes effectively. Thank you so much. Let's get started.
All right, thanks, Erin. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good GIS week so far. The talks that I've been to have been really impressive. So just right off the bat, I should explain that this talk and my work in general on this is, I think, a little bit different than most of what else is being presented here. I would describe most of the talks that we've had as being about production of GIS output. And what I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to focus on a little more is consumption of GIS output. All right, so as Erin mentioned, I am a decision analyst. That's my background. What that means in general, I'm just really summarizing succinctly here, is that it means that for any decision you're facing, you want to get all relevant information, all relevant decision maker preferences, and organize and structure that in some kind of thorough, coherent way that allows you to compare different alternatives in a way that we hope is helpful. The particular area that I focus on mostly in my research is multi-attribute preferences, meaning decisions where you care about more than one thing. So if you're buying a car, you can't just describe a car easily with one number. You probably care about price and fuel efficiency and horsepower and safety rating and whatever else. And you have to figure out how to make appropriate trade-offs among those alternatives, among those attributes. And a lot of these same concepts that decision analysts work with all the time can be really helpful for decisions that have geographic outcomes of the type that we've seen plenty of this week. Right. So I'm just showing this very quickly. I've got a references page at the end, but it's based on a few different projects. I also wanted to thank Decision Center for a Desert City, who funded some of the earlier work on this. Now, these are just examples of maps that I pulled off of the ESRI policy map site. And it may be that for some policy decisions that we're facing, that simply having these maps might be enough, that simply informing whoever the decision makers and other stakeholders are that this is what the pattern of heating or homelessness or internet access looks like across this area, that might be enough to spur action and make it clear what sorts of measures they want to take. However, I'm gonna dig a little bit deeper into the decisions that might be based on these maps and relate to these sorts of policies. I'm gonna do it first by showing this cool thing called the decision theater. This is at Arizona State. There's another one in Washington, D.C. now. And the idea behind this was that you could get a bunch of policymakers together in this theater, and you could show them detailed projections of what would happen if they changed various policy levers for the problem that they're working on. That is, you could see one map that would result if you chose policy A, another map that would result if you chose policy B, et cetera. And the hope was you could bring people in, they could look at these projected outcomes, and that would be enough to make it clear what policy they'd prefer. And our reaction to this as decision analysts was, let's hold on a second. It's probably not going to work out as cleanly and as well as you might hope. This is actually a very hard thing to ask decision makers to do. So just thinking about it as a very simple comparison between two maps. This is a map of the county I live in now, and I left the scale out to just keep this deliberately vague. If we were considering different strategies for infrastructure and water management policies, and two of our potential strategies would result in these two maps, how would we look at these two maps and judge which one of these we prefer, even without complicating it with detailed numbers and scales and all of that? I would argue that if you if you give this to two policymakers and say, make a decision based on this, they're not going to thoroughly look at every single census tract, look at exactly how much water usage there is in that tract and aggregate them in some kind of rigorous way. They're going to use some kind of heuristic. They're going to look at either the most populous areas and say, oh, we want to make sure we don't have a lot of dark blue there. Or they may simply rely on summary metrics, right? They might look at overall water usage. And if you're going to do something like that, why bother with the maps anyway? So the point I'm trying to make here is this kind of comparison is not easy to do at all. Decisions that are based on output from, that are based on maps of GIS data, they're difficult for many reasons, the overarching one being that there's just tons of information to process. But you may care about more than one thing, right? You may not just care about groundwater usage, you may also care about temperature or pollution or whatever else might be affected by the policy choice. You almost certainly have to deal with a huge number of locations, depending on the granularity of your data. Maybe that's every pixel, maybe that's by census tract or zip code or county or whatever it is, but there's a very large number of locations to consider. And when it comes to preferences, to what the decision makers actually want, what their priorities are, you have to consider both trade-offs between different attributes, like sacrificing something on temperature to improve groundwater or pollution or whatever else. You also have to think about trade-offs between areas, right? How much of a hit am I willing to take in one place to improve attributes somewhere else? Right. And for most of these decisions, just by the nature of having decisions that affect a large area, you're probably going to have a lot of stakeholders. You might have competing interests. They might care about very different things. So what all of that boils down to, it's really, really complicated trying to compare these potential maps that result from policies in a way that adequately captures all of the information and how decision makers feel about that information. Right. So what we're going to try to do, or what we've been doing, is not to reinvent the wheel, but to take standard things that decision analysts already do and adapt them to this setting. So I'm not going to go through these in any detail. These are, I've got a few references at the bottom and at the end. Whoop, sorry, didn't advance there. But we use things like value and utility functions to translate the physical measure of an attribute to a common scale of how relatively good or bad those various levels are. We also assess sets of weights for the different attributes that reflect how much of a concern each one of those attributes is, and we assess a set of weights by region, by location on the map. So sometimes we are going to care more about certain areas than others for various reasons. But what we're trying to do in the end is to be able to translate each resulting policy, which may take the form of one or more projected maps, into a single score that captures all of that information. So we're taking one or more maps, running it through this process of applying value functions about how we feel about different levels of the attribute, weights for the different attributes, weights for the different regions, to come up with one score at the end that says this policy gets a 0.70 after going through all of that stuff. Right, so I realize this is a little bit abstract so far. So let me walk through a simple example that we worked with. This was based on a model called LUMPS that was done in Phoenix. It's an urban heat flux model. We didn't build the model; we just used the model to as the basis for this kind of procedure that we've been going through. What the LUMPS model does is it models heat flux. It models temperature and the effects of various development, landscape features, buildings, et cetera, on temperature at a really granular level. And it was built for Phoenix. I had not realized before looking at this model what an enormous effect those decisions have on temperature. You can have a block of a city in a downtown area that is 10 degrees hotter than a lot of the surrounding area. So the people who developed this model ran ran it on 10 census tracts for a few different development strategies, just as a demonstration of how their model works and what it could be used for. And those strategies that they were looking at, we want to evaluate them based on two different objectives. That's going to translate to two attributes that will be described for each of those tracts. The first thing we care about is temperature. They measure that by looking at what's called night cooling. It's in degrees of Celsius per hour. So it's how much does it cool off at night, given that development strategy. Remember, this is Phoenix. It's really hot during the day. And the second thing that they care about is minimizing evaporation rate. It's a desert. They don't want to lose water. Right. So based on this model, for these three representative development strategies, they can tell you in each one of those tracts how much night cooling you're going to get and how much evaporation rate. Right. So what we then did is walk through how you can apply a decision maker's preferences, as represented by weights and value functions, to this problem, to a set of decisions like this. We use just very, very simple value functions and weights. All we were trying to do here is capture that there are some diminishing returns. We used a really simple exponential curve. And this is the information that you would want to assess from the relevant stakeholders to make sure that you are capturing how they feel about these attributes and different levels of the attributes accurately, and capturing trade-offs between them. So in this case, those weights are implying that they care a little bit more about night cooling, about temperature, than they do about evaporation rate for these development decisions. Right. So the first thing we could do, just based on that information, without even getting into any complicated policy questions, is you could just look at which of the three development strategies is optimal for each of the 10 tracts. Right? So that's what that picture is showing. It's mostly compact, with a couple of oases and one desert. But what I think is a little more powerful is how this can be used as an input into broader policy questions on this, rather than just looking at each tract and saying, what should we build there? For instance, if there were policy directives that we need to improve these attributes by 5% or more, well, then we can put our preference model into an optimization model that will tell us if these are the constraints, then after you assess weights on the individual tracts, you can find the optimum configuration that satisfies those policy directives. So for instance, if you just say we care about all the census tracts equally, then you will get the set of strategies that's shown there. If more weight is given to the tracts that are in the central part of Phoenix, then you get a slightly different set of optimal development strategies. There's an oasis in there somewhere. So this kind of approach is meant to serve as a foundation, as an input to a wide range of kinds of policy questions that you might have for a given problem or a given setting. The challenge is always going to be how you elicit those preferences from policymakers or other relevant stakeholders. There are a bunch of standard methods in decision analysis for doing this, which in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through, but there are plenty of examples out there of how these things are done. The hard part, and the one that's most relevant to this kind of problem, is trying to assess the weights on different regions, on different parts of the map. And thorny ethical issues aside, it's a challenge just because the number of weights is really large. You're looking at lots and lots of different locations, and a lot of the weight assessment methods that decision analysis people use are really geared toward a small, manageable set of attributes, right, where there are only so many weights you need to assess. So if you're doing something really rigorous and quantitative to figure those weights out, probably a good idea to use simple maps as examples, really isolate the specific trade-off that you are trying to get from the decision maker. Or you can use approximation methods for this. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there are many ways to make that whole process easier. You can classify regions into tiers of importance and convert those to weights. If you know exactly what key trade-offs the policy decision is going to hinge on, you could assess only the preferences, the aspects of preferences that specifically relate to that. Probably the most common approach out there for doing this is just to do it automatically based on some existing measure. So whether that's area, population, economic value, environmental sensitivity, some combination of those. Right. But these are all just ways of getting weights that approximate how relatively critical each region is to this decision. Right. Also generally a good idea because of the possible wide range of stakeholders to do some sensitivity analysis on all of these preference parameters that go into the decision or the range of decisions, just to make sure that if there are any of them that are particularly crucial to the problem, that is, if these parameters are, if these weights or these value functions shift a little bit, that it might affect the decision, to make sure that you spend the time on those parameters in particular to make sure they really are capturing what the decision maker or the various stakeholders want. Right. So I think I am almost out of time here, so I'm just going to leave the references page up for a second. This is the time to hit print screen, I guess, if you want to look anything up later. I kept all the math details in the appendix because we only have so much time. But if anybody's curious about those, I can walk you through them or connect individually about them offline. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Jay. Does anyone have any questions for chat, or if they want to open to the floor, or you can use chat to ask your questions directly to Jay, whatever you feel comfortable with. But if not, we're just going to move ahead so we can stay on schedule. And I'm going to pass the baton to Heather. Here. And do that. Trying to.
Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Well, then I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Chou. I am a third-year undergraduate at UCLA. And today I'll be presenting a project called MetaMap, where we are aiming to put disability on the map. So just as a disclaimer, before I dive into this project's presentation, I would like to preface that I am an able-bodied individual. So today I will be speaking on behalf of both my disabled comrades, as well as other students, faculty, and staff who could not be here today to present alongside me. But I emphasize that each and every one of them were all critical to the starting continuity and efforts of MetaMap and its mission to increase accessibility for all at UCLA. With that said, let's begin with a brief background of what MetaMap is. So the life of MetaMap so far. In January of 2020, the birth of MetaMap was initiated by a group of disabled UCLA students, faculty, and staff, along with some able-bodied allies who all came together to share with each other their experiences and lived stories about accessibility and navigation around UCLA's hilly, not so accommodating campus. Eventually, their conversations led them to use GIS to lay the initial foundations for UCLA's campus accessibility map, which began with an extensive network of digitized, color-coded accessible paths, as well as the starting of data collection for accessible bathrooms, whose progress was interrupted by the onset of COVID-19. And very quickly, MetaMap's purpose and necessity began to gain momentum in support and interest. But with the new remote environment brought on by the pandemic, the MetaMap group had to have more conversations around how the project could continue during that time. So when November of 2020 came around, the MetaMap team began its close collaborations with UCLA's Geography Association and students in the Geography and GIS department. With this, I had the very lucky privilege to join the amazing MetaMap team as the GIS student lead and aid in the continuation of the Accessible Path Network. Additionally, during this time until February of 2021, MetaMap applied for a monetary award offered by UCLA's Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or EDI for short. And then in March of 2021, MetaMap was awarded the funds from EDI to help partially support a specific part of this project. And after discussions of what could possibly be achieved by the end of spring quarter using these funds, it was decided to focus on digitizing and inventorying all exterior accessible entrances, paths to entrances, and ramps. Then beginning in spring quarter and until the funds end in June of 2021, a new cohort of MetaMappers, which consisted of me, 4 new interns who have background knowledge or skill specialties in GIS, and other members from the other MetaMap staff, set off to work to achieve what we call the EDI-funded Accessible Entrances and Entrance Paths deliverable in an academic quarter's time. So throughout the portion of this project, the MetaMap team's ultimate goal to put disability on the map can be perceived as having 2 scopes, although we should be aware that these goals are not siloed and do lead into each other. The overarching goal for the project as a whole, beyond this deliverable, is to develop data-rich and interactive mapping resources for accessibility features using GIS and other software that would expand accessibility and empower the disabled community through such resources in both physical and online spaces. As for the goal, the EDI-funded portion of the project, our team aims to focus on increasing and improving accessibility and navigation options for everyone on campus by transforming UCLA's existing static PDF accessibility map into an in-depth dataset and web app of exterior accessible entrances, entrance paths, and ramps at UCLA that can be easily accessed and utilized by users in an interactive fashion. Beyond this deliverable, however, our team continues to bring the statement of putting disability on the map to life through the overarching goal. And because MetaMap is still in its earlier stages and is a long-term project, the EDI-funded portion of MetaMap is, once again, a temporary but valuable resource that will eventually be incorporated into a newly revised official UCLA campus accessibility geared map in the near future. So now I will cover a bit more of our project's methodology, workflow, and timeline. So the first phase of this deliverable mostly involved the process of preparing and continuing the data cleaning for the existing MetaMap Accessible Path framework, as well as applying for and receiving the funds from the EDI office, allowing us to hire the new team of GIS technician and fieldwork interns. We then moved forward with the data collection process and digitization of accessible exterior doors, ramps, and any paths connected to these features. We started off by dividing up the campus into smaller sections, first completing the student residential and athletics area known as the Hill and off-campus university apartments. Then we moved on to the main parts of campus, commonly referred to as the North and South campuses. We began with the remote fieldwork and relied on EagleView, which is an aerial imagery software provider, and Google Maps for attribute data collection. But then under safety COVID precaution protocols, our interns who were living close to campus conducted their in-person fieldwork using the Esri Collector app, while the behind-the-scenes data management side of the team took those live incoming data and organized the numerous features and layers using Arc Pro and Arc Online, allowing for an efficient and synchronous workflow. This step ties into the third phase of revisions and feedback converse between our GIS team and our disabled team members. Together, using Esri's Experience Builder and Story Maps applications, we built an interactive web app, map, and storyline for our project. In building this interactive experience builder map, we collaborated with students on our team who had visual impairments, such as color blindness and low vision, to help us decide what colors to use to distinguish each feature that visually made sense to both disabled and able-bodied users. We also created Excel data spreadsheets that users with accessibility considerations on the web can download, and these are made available on our StoryMap and MetaMap website for increased accessible user experience. In the final phase at the end of the academic year, the interactive web app, StoryMap, and website were used to present as final deliverables to the EDI funders, as well as to be provided to users as an interactive experience and temporary accessibility resource, all while showing what MetaMap has in store for its future in accessibility. In promoting the project's future and purpose for both inside and outside the UCLA community, our team aims to not just show how inaccessible our campus was, especially with the LA 2028 Paralympics coming up, but to show how much potential the campus has for being a leader in accessibility. So here are examples of attributes that we collected and that are associated for each entrance feature, as well as for paths and ramps. So as you can see, on the left side, we collected characteristics for each entrance, such as the associated building and entrance names, door types, whether they are single or double door, marked as accessible, number of paths leading to the entrance, the types of these paths, such as if they are flat paths, ramps, or stairs, if ramps are even indicated, if these doors are unpowered or powered, button access type, such as if they require a key card or not, if there are any power door symbols, access restrictions, or Braille present, which we found that a lot of Braille was actually outdated, or a lot of them were missing or incorrect, and door handle types, as well as some images of the entrances. On the right side, as you can see, path attributes were also documented in a similar fashion with slightly different attributes, emphasizing things such as surface types, such as if they're concrete, uneven pavement, or asphalt, and the like. The slope and direction of the incline of the path or ramp, and if there are tactile paving, curb cuts, handrails, loading docks, call boxes, bus stops, or a well-lit environment present for these paths or ramps. At the conclusion of the spring quarter, our team reflected and would continue to reflect on the aspects of this part of MetaMap that are worth highlighting. So in the span of an academic quarter, which is about 10 weeks, the MetaMap team digitized and collected extensive up-to-date data on an astounding 535 accessible exterior entrances, of which 31% of these doors had been missing from UCLA's existing accessibility map, and 140 accessible exterior ramps for UCLA's campus. We also went from a simple static PDF map of the campus that contained only 3 attributes for each door feature, which included just the building name, entrance type, and cardinal direction, to an impressive 17 distinct attributes for each entryway. The right side depicts the transformation from the static PDF map to the interactive web app map. So as we move forward into considering MetaMap's future, our team strives in the long run to have a complete and possibly personalized routing and navigation app for UCLA's campus that includes accessibility-focused features and will take numerous accessibility considerations into account. Also, as previously mentioned, MetaMap aims to not only shed light on the lack of accessibility in the physical and online world, but to demonstrate how UCLA has the potential to increase its accessibility for everyone on campus and be a leader in accessibility. We also plan to incorporate multi-floor mapping, continue cataloging indoor entrances, elevators, and ramps, and reboot the data collection process on the accessible bathrooms that was started prior to COVID-19. And last but not least, we are in the process of creating and improving on the accessibility assets and space inventory for all the libraries on UCLA's campus. And these features will consider assets that are important for students, faculty, and staff such as accessible study spaces, Braille, and library stack widths. And finally, just to wrap things up, here are some key lessons learned and really important takeaways from this part of the MetaMap project. First of all, the disabled community empowerment efforts and involvement throughout the whole process of MetaMap was and continues to be a critical aspect for the short and long-term success and impact of the project. The inclusion and engagement with the voices of the communities of interest involve, listening to and integrating their lived experiences into the project. And being responsive and action-oriented allies also involves advocating for change in alignment with their interests and concerns, all while humanizing the data and just going beyond the numbers and the pixels on the screen. Our MetaMap team, consisting of both, disabled and able-bodied individuals, believes in directly involving the people who are part of the data, from its creation and ideation to its management, to the actual work, advocacy, and continuity of MetaMap and its mission and message to communities inside and outside UCLA. Additionally, communication, collaboration, and team bonding among team members and maintaining important relationships with stakeholders and others involved in the project allowed for a streamlined workflow and improved time management that helped our team reach the expected deadlines. Especially in the remote environment brought on by the pandemic, our MetaMap team found that having working group meetings, Zoom socials, or just throwing fun group texts once in a while, or check-ins, even if they're once, twice, sometimes even like 3 times a week, was critical and made the work enjoyable and very valuable. And supporting team members as much as possible and building a trust in each other was crucial during such difficult times, as each of us lived multifaceted lives beyond the balance of work and academics. And last but not least, and this applies to so many, if not all projects, that ensuring and maintaining the quality, accuracy, and reliability of the data we collected matters for this project. Beyond the simple good and bad data, our team emphasizes that it is important to make sure that the data makes sense for the demographic or purpose of interest, and that it is an accurate, up-to-date, and reliable resource that can be used by the target audience. And before I move on to the next slide, here's a fun picture of our MetaMappers from one of our working group meetings. Before I move on to the very last slide, I just want to touch again on my disclaimer that I, again, am not a disabled person myself, and some of my colleagues are, and the anecdotes that they share are theirs to tell, but we do have presentations for their stories. And I just also want to say that before coming into this project, I can tell you a little bit about my own ignorance about accessibility, both in the physical world and the online world. And this project has truly opened my eyes to how GIS can be used as a valuable tool and resource for communities such as the disabled community, and really empowering them and helping them to access more resources that a lot of able-bodied people, such as me, for example, take for granted every day. And now that we've gone through everything, I just want to thank all, the disabled and able-bodied people involved in the entire life of MetaMap so far. And I just want to give a huge shout out to these MetaMappers in particular, and whose pictures are shown here on the screen. Huge shout out to Sean, who was our Doors and Ramps team GIS student lead, and Jared, who was one of the GIS technician interns, and both of them made the project management, assisting, data cleaning, and fieldwork organization very much possible. And more shout outs to Ada and Molly, who were our GIS fieldwork interns and who were critical for the data collection process. And another huge big shout out to Carol Ann Link, who's my lovely supervisor who has introduced me to the world of accessibility, and whose stories and lived experiences as a disabled individual on our team have continued to open my eyes to the world that we live in every day. And lastly, a huge shout out to David Yamamoto of Facilities Management, who has played an integral part in providing his wise insights, knowledge, and expertise of our campus for our team. And not pictured here is Albert Koshefan, who closely collaborated with us throughout the entire part of this project, and who is now doing big things outside of UCLA, but has continued to provide our team with his valuable support and expertise. And with that, thank you very much for your time. And here are, I will drop these links in the chat to everyone if you want to check out our MetaMap website, the story map, and the interactive experience builder. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. If you can post those in the chat, that would really help us out. Then I'll share them on Slack, and then the audience can interact with those or save them as bookmarks for later. So excellent work. Great job, MetaMap, and great job to your team and to a wonderful presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Heather? Again, you can contact Heather directly on chat or email or however you want to communicate. So we're going to move on to JT Miller from UC Santa Barbara. And I just saw JT here.
Can everyone see my
See
screen
here.
okay?
Yes. Let me see you. You may have a little bit of bandwidth issue, just to warn you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing the yellow bar. So if you freeze for whatever reason, that's why. So I don't want to make you panic. I'm just giving you the heads up that you
Gotcha.
may be you may be competing with Wi-Fi there. So
All right.
well, thank you, JT. I'll let you get started.
Alrighty. Hi, my name is JT Miller. I'm a fourth-year undergrad at UC Santa Barbara studying ecology and evolution. Today, I'd like to present some of my research that I've been doing at CBER in biodiversity science using the programming language R to filter down large-scale organismal occurrence data to fix set boundaries. Sorry, what was she? So first of all, what is organismal occurrence data? To put it simply, this is a type of data that is collected through human observations and natural history collections on specimens, and it includes some basic information such as the scientific name, the collection date, and the geographic coordinates. This type of data is an integral part of biodiversity science since it can be used to understand species composition in specific geographic areas, as well as particular species distributions. This data exists in mass on open source data aggregates such as GBIF, which hosts just over 1.896 billion occurrence records. So there's kind of always this question of how to use portions of this data meaningfully. And GBIF offers fields of filters and searches to narrow down your data. However, this isn't always the most robust way to guarantee that the data you're acquiring is strictly within your geographic region of interest. So some of the research that I am doing is to find ways to make this process of data collection from these aggregates a bit more reproducible. So what is R? R is a programming language that is freely available and provides easily readable and reproducible work. One of its biggest strengths is that its community is actively building packages for it, and these provide functions for analyzing data in pretty much every way. These factors have made R a standard in the literature for biological analysis. Importantly for my research, R provides access to many geospatial packages such as SF and SP, as well as ggplots to help visualize the data. So how does this script work? Data is acquired from GBIF, and then it can be loaded into my R script along with a shapefile that indicates your boundary of interest. Using the script, the user can then filter down occurrence records to only include what is inside the boundary of that shapefile. This output can then be stored as a .csv file for any further analysis. For a sample application of this project, we looked at Coal Point Reserve as a case study. Coal Point is a UC-owned reserve that has a variety of habitats like that slough, which is that lagoon you can kind of see in the top right, to the ocean front you can see in the bottom right. This reserve hosts many important wildlife species, so understanding exactly where and what lives here is an important question for land management. As you can see on the figure on the right, a multi-polygon shapefile boundary representing Coal Point was created and read into R. Occurrence data was then obtained from GBIF using the search parameters of Santa Barbara as the location and looking specifically for any organisms in phylum Arthropoda. First, the occurrence files data was assigned the Coordinate Reference System, or CRS for short, of the World Geodetic System made in 1984. And this was then made into a simple features object so that it could be plotted with the shapefile in ggplot. Utilizing the package SF, a transformation of the CRSs was then performed on the occurrence data to match the shapefile CRS. An important thing to keep in mind whenever you transform a CRS is the possibility of inducing error. For this particular transformation, error of approximately 2 meters is to be expected according to ESPG transformation documentation. The transformed occurrence data was then plotted with the Coal Point shapefile. As you can see in the figure on the left, in the initial data acquisition from GBIF using the search parameters of phylum Arthropoda at Santa Barbara gives a lot more data from outside the reserve. In fact, there's over 75,000 observations from this first data filter. And you'll notice that there's data included in the Channel Islands as well as the coastal regions of Galita. Zooming in, you can find the shapefile of Coal Point Reserve with plenty of data outside of this region. To remedy this, the occurrence data was then subsetted against the shapefile's boundary. This filtered out all the occurrences outside of the shapefile's boundary, reducing our observation count from just over 75,000 to just above 1,600 occurrence records. This script also features some customizable chunks of code that allow the user to break up the geometry column, which is a byproduct of the transformation process that combines the latitude and longitude coordinates into an XY format. There is also a chunk for allowing the user to count up identical location observations, as you may have noticed on this map that there seems to be less than 1,600 observations. This filter data can then be downloaded as a .csv file for any further analysis. Some of the key takeaways based on available data from Coal Point are the presence of 17 unique orders of phylum Arthropoda, and that most of these observations recorded come from the orders Coleoptera, which are the beetles, and Hymenoptera, which are the bees, ants, and wasps. Species richness also differed greatly from the initial data acquisition of Santa Barbara County, which had a total of 2,410 arthropod species compared to the 160 species found at Coal Point. Noticeably, there is also high quantities of certain orders recorded in the same geographic locations. A possible reason for this is ongoing research efforts in targeted identification at Coal Point Reserve. Some other features of this script in visualizations are the usages of the interactive Plotly and Leaflet packages. Plotly combines well with ggplots, allowing the user to integrate hover text and narrow down each point as far as what it includes in taxonomic rank, as well as the number of times it was observed at that location. Leaflet requires a slight alteration in how the data is transformed, but it provides the same results. And in this package, the user can work with an interactive map that shows geographic features, as well as allows for the alteration of the layers to visualize. This research has brought up some other interesting questions pertaining to how geospatial data of organisms interacts with strict boundaries. First, constraining the data to a strict boundary may give inadequate information on species composition, since you're kind of working under the assumption that there's no georeference error. Another consideration for working with this type of data is that just because that occurrence wasn't recorded inside the boundary, doesn't mean the organism's range doesn't extend inside your shapefile due to movement. These considerations should be taken into account when interpreting occurrence data under strict boundary conditions. Using these methods, I will be expanding this project in the upcoming year to ask further questions about species diversity and how it interacts inside different biogeographical regions within California. The scope of this project was advised for by Professor Seltman at CBER, and the funding for this project was provided for by the NSF grant DBI 2010-2006. Thank you.
Thank you, JT. What a great talk. I always like to see how users are making maps in R, just because I'm used to making maps in other programs, and R is really popular and useful. Does anyone have any questions for JT before we move on to Darin Jensen at UCOP? Okay, well, thank you again. Great job. And let me try to do that. Okay. And hello, Darin. And when you're ready, make sure you unmute also.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Darin Jensen. I am a data visualization, excuse me. I'm Darin Jensen, a data visualization analyst at Institutional Research and Academic Planning. We're at the Office of the President, housed in downtown Oakland. I formerly was a continuing lecturer of geography and taught cartography classes at UC Berkeley for many years. So I come to this work of institutional research with a geographic background, and really excited to share with you some of the ways that at the Office of the President, we use geographic data in our advocacy efforts with the aim of helping decision-making at the policy level. So very quickly, I'm going to run through a couple things before I start showing you some maps. So the learning goals today are: what makes geodata valuable? What makes geodata valuable to the University of California? And how does the University of California use geodata in advocacy? So if you'll allow me this very simplified description of the value of geodata, I say that its essential value is in establishing context of space and creating place. When we add layers of geographic data to a space, such as the peninsula that defines San Francisco, we can add other layers and start creating spaces, whether it's parks, we add roads, the human-built environment, and suddenly we have places and more roads like freeways that connect that place to other places, and we continue to have an expansion of relatability at the human scale. What makes geodata valuable to the University of California is that we are interested in demonstrating how we fulfill the mission of teaching, research, and public service to the government and to the public. And my work focuses on advocacy to the legislators in California, because they are some of the most important policymakers when it comes to the future of the university. I have a passion for maps and really believe that maps are a powerful tool for disseminating data and for storytelling for three main reasons. I think of maps as an invitation. The nature of their graphic format pulls people in. And I think that imagery, whether it's maps or photography or infographics, has a way of capturing a reader's attention in a way that plain text cannot. And maps are democratic. All types of learners have a way to enter into a map document. There are people who are visual learners who will be pulled right into the color and the design, and that will be a way for them to start interpreting the map. There are people who focus on the data, and they might go straight to the map legend and start deciphering what the data means and what the data point means. And a lot of maps have text on them, and that's a way for a text learner to enter the map. And then once that person is in the map, if you will, then they're going to start moving around, and nobody reads a map the same way. And so everybody will get what they can interpret from the map and get a takeaway message. And maps, of course, carry authority. Often, I'll say, Sometimes the authority is unwarranted, but there have been studies that show that people tend to believe maps more than they do a textual description of a place. They are believable inherently, and they can be verifiable. They're not very often verified by readers, but they can be. So how does the University of California use geodata? We have various channels that all have the overarching goal of advocating for the university. We produce static maps, interactive dashboard maps, and I'm going to share with you mostly a hybrid static interactive map application today. Pardon me, sorry. I should have gone into display mode, yeah. Sorry about that. So this is a static map incorporating a map into an infographic to demonstrate UC's commitment to intersegmental transfer. And you can see that besides the map, there's other data represented here. And the points on the map are transfer students, where the 113 California community colleges are, and the 9 UC undergraduate campuses. So it's also showing the proximity of the students in California to the institutions that are providing them with higher education. Here's a poster created. This is a large format poster created to show the economic impact on the state of UC's research activities. There's a lot of impact in California and the nation and the world from UC's research activities. And this map shows the UC startups, the UC technologies that are currently licensed, and the choropleth of the counties is UC research spending. This is basically vendor receipts. Everything from paper towels and beakers and petri dishes to large technical equipment. Also on this map, in a small gray dot, is every UC employee's home location. Of course, anonymized at this scale. This is a static map, so this data is not downloadable or searchable. These are anonymous. UC research employees live in 57 of 58 California counties and in all 50 states of the United States. Created for the UC Accountability Report, this map demonstrates UC's consistent local enrollment numbers. Before I came to OP, these data were presented in the Accountability Report as tables, and I noticed this consistency year to year of the number of incoming freshmen and transfers who were coming from a 50-mile radius of the campus they were going to. And you'll see a really low number here. I'll just call out Santa Barbara has really low numbers, and that's only because of Santa Barbara's relative geographic isolation. Also for the accountability report and using some alumni data and California EDD data, this map visualizes the UC alumni employment by industry across the state. So we know where alumni are working in higher education, healthcare, finance and insurance, and we can show that distribution. Our information center hosts many dashboards, and some of them have a map focus, and this one shows the origin schools of UC's California Community College transfer students. And these are interactive dashboards. You can go to the UC Information Center and find these, and you can change the search for a certain school. You can change the term. All of these dashboards at the UC Information Center are very interactive. Okay, I'm going to very quickly get us to this website. This is the UC in California Impact Beyond Borders website. And I am apologies. I did not handle that very well. Can you see the website?
No, I was actually going to try to find the website for you too, or if you put it in chat, maybe one of us can share it.
Well, I'm sorry for everybody that, do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies. This was such a smooth hour that you guys ran. I'm very impressed with the presenters. So this is the UC in California Impact Beyond Campus Borders website. This is used primarily by state government relations and federal government relations folks to demonstrate the impact of UC's community-based programs. So it can be searched by different legislative districts, and you can choose a locale. I don't know why it's not filling up the whole screen. It was, and we can pick a district and it will zoom into that district, and you can see it gave us the zoom into the district, and it will show you the community-based programs in that district. And you can, there's 20,000 and it spans, I think, 13 different community program types. And the very last thing I'm going to show you is the PDF. This is the static part version. These maps on one side show the legislative district, the legislator, the number of community-based programs in that district, many of these far afield from a campus. And on the back of each page is summary statistics that outline the undergraduate student pipeline to the university, student aid numbers, employee impact through the number of employees, the employee payroll, and other counts like alumni and retirees. And I'll finish real quick by just saying that SGR, state government relations and federal government relations liaisons to legislators tell me that one of the two documents that they take to every single meeting with the legislator is a hard copy of these maps, because it helps them so much show that UC is working for them in their district. We're over by a minute, so I'm going to end it, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Darin, and I hope everybody got the link and they can check out the data, because I mean, I know personally I've really immersed myself into the data that UCOP has provided. It's very, very interesting analytics, especially for a university like UC Merced. We're new and we're trying to figure out, you know, where our students are coming from, where maybe get the engagements. And I personally live an hour in the more rural area in Merced, and it's interesting to look at students that are coming out of our rural areas, if they're going to UCs or if they're transferring, and all the different pathways. But it's a tremendous amount of information, and like you said, maps, it's really easy to wrap your head around the data if you can look at the map versus the tables. So I just want to commend you for the work. It is, I can say at our university, we do rely on that data and we look at it, and it's very useful.
Thank you.
Well, I think that is it. I know there's a career set there. There's one more session at 2 that you might all be jumping into, but heartfelt thank you to all of our presenters today. And I hope everyone's having a great GIS /week/day. And I'm going to sign off and say goodbye. And thank you again. Nice to meet everybody. And we will hopefully see each other sometime in the future. Take care.